welcome to the 2023 DC Summit hosted by AWS. My name is Jeff Marushek. I'm a Senior Solutions Architect on our DoD Air Force team. And with me, my co-host Nivas. How are you doing today? And go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Jeff. My name is Nivas. I'm a cloud governance specialist supporting our customers on our governance services. And we have a very special guest today. Leo, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey, my name is Leo Jadnovsky. I'm the Chief Technologist for Education here at AWS, and I work with a lot of our higher ed tech, and publisher customers along with K-12, and I help them, deploy workloads. I help them work with our service teams, and I help them do really big mission-critical launches. So it's a lot of fun.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's great to have you today. We're going to be talking about something you're announcing, but first of all, let's talk about LZA, or Landing Zone Accelerator, which is an AWS solution. It's not a service, it's a solution. But can you explain really quickly what Landing Zone Accelerator is?
Yeah.
And we'll start there.
Yeah, so Landing Zone Accelerator, it's like you said, it's an open source solution, and it helps you quickly deploy secure, resilient, and scalable, like a landing zone or a foundation for your accounts. So, I mean, going back another layer, the challenge that our customers have is they basically want to have secure, sane defaults in their AWS accounts, and a lot of them, as they scale, they're going to a multi-account setup. So they're using multiple accounts for different workloads, different environments, and they want to be able to provision accounts, and they want to be able to maybe delete those accounts when they don't need them with sets of config rules, service control policies, all kinds of things like that, or maybe their VPC policies. And so what we typically see customers do is, first they use Control Tower, right? Because Control Tower is our managed service. It creates landing zones for you. You can programmatically provision accounts. And so that's what customers do first. And then if they need to customize their sets of controls, and they also, if they need to say, have it so that they can treat their controls as code, that's where Landing Zone Accelerator comes in.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually demoed this for one of my customers. And when you think of like a ready-to-go solution, you think, oh, there's going to be a bunch of CloudFormation templates that you just deploy. And while Landing Zone Accelerator does create CloudFormation, it's really all controlled, like you said, in a Git repository.
Yeah.
So the funny story with my customers, they wanted a landing zone with one click. And then when I demoed it for them, I said, well, I gave you a landing zone with one commit.
Yeah.
And it was, I thought it was a pretty cool saying, but some of them understood the power in that. So that's what makes it really exciting, that you could make those commits with your DevSecOps aware operational teams, and it fits within that model.
Yeah, for sure. And if you look at the evolution of this, a long time ago, people were using configuration management systems to treat what's on there, like instances or containers, as code, right?
Yeah.
Then we went to infrastructure as code. So now you can treat how you configure your services as code. And now we're looking at security and compliance configuration as code. And I think that's really powerful for a lot of reasons.
Sure. Right.
Yeah. And I want to get us back to LZA for education.
Yeah.
How does this solution work for customers? Who is it for?
Yeah.
Yes.
So again, going back to the customer challenge that we had, we talked to a bunch of higher ed institutions. And these are institutions who do things like they put in learning management systems on AWS, student information systems, all kinds of like really critical workloads, right, that power their core mission. And they were looking again for how do we govern security, and how do we set up the same set of controls. And so we wanted to give them a reasonable starting point. So we talked to a bunch of our customers, and we found out what controls they were using, and that's how we ended up with this. So this is a specific configuration of Landing Zone Accelerator, and it's, again, based off of what our customers are actually doing, except before, a lot of them were doing this through like custom code they didn't really want to maintain, and custom solutions. And again, this is all in a Git repo, and they can control it as code, which is really powerful.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing, is that you mentioned earlier, it's open source. This is free to use, like
Yeah.
the configuration. Now, obviously, you're going to pay for the resources you use, but this isn't a managed service. This is I purposely started the segment by saying it is a solution
Yes.
that is open to anyone. And I work with the government, the DoD, and there are some changes that they utilize to adhere to DISA's SCCA methodology. But it's interesting to see now we're moving out into a different environment with education.
Sure.
Yeah, and so what this does is that's kind of differentiated from some of the other configs. So it gives you a set of accounts that's similar to what we see in education. So it sets up accounts for an SIS system and an LMS system in production and staging. It sets up some configurations for logging, monitoring, and notifications. And it also configures AWS config, security hub, guard duty, again, control tower, with a bunch of things like enforcing password policies, encryption at rest, in transit, detecting non-compliant services so you can address that. And it's also based off of our best practices config. It just adds some stuff onto it.
Excellent. So it's based on our multi-account strategy, sets up the OUs based on what an educational institution will need.
Yeah.
Does it set up an OU that's specific to certain EDU accounts?
Yeah. So I'll show you during the demo in the GitHub. We have a layout of how it sets up the accounts, and so it sets up like a specific OU for SIS and LMS, and this is just a starting point. So, like you said, you take this and you customize it, because at the end of the day, you have to think about, what do I have to comply with? What are my legal or my internal security and compliance requirements? And that boils down to a set of controls, right? And so this gives you a starting point for those controls, but you then still have to work with your legal team and figure out, how do I secure my apps? Am I covering everything? This just makes it easier for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What I like is that I think we should stress, as a college or EDU organization is working with Landing Zone Accelerator to say they start playing with something and they have like a test account, but then when they need like the next environment, so maybe they say, okay, we're ready to spin up a QA account. It's really just a change to a config file.
Yep.
Someone commits that.
Yep.
And then everything is done. The account is created. It's put in the right OU in organizations. Control tower sees it. All the SCPs are applied automatically with one commit. So I think that's very powerful.
Yeah. And I like the fact that it actually works very well with Control Tower. So it uses some of the Control Tower controls with the LZA controls to give the customer a solid foundational environment.
So it uses Control Tower and also like config and security hub. It uses all of our services. So it's not like recreating anything, it's just configuring them, right? So it takes advantage of like all the Control Tower features, and as those evolve, we'll evolve the solution, take advantage of them as well. Yeah. And like you said, the other thing that's really cool is you do the commit, and it uses a code pipeline, and you can see it deploying that commit through different stages. So if you have a typo or there's an error of some kind, it's not a mystery. You can go to your code pipeline, you can see what the error is, you can fix it, and you just rerun it. And so it's all auditable as well.
All right, so I know from firsthand experience, deploying Landing Zone Accelerator can take a little bit. But it sounds like that you have an environment already kind of built out, and you want to walk us through it and kind of show us how it works after it's built.
Yeah, so let me just rearrange my windows here, and then we'll go over it. Yeah, let's switch to the demo here. Sure. All right, so if you look at my screen here, basically this is the code repo. So this is code commit, and this has all these are all the controls and configs in here. So if you ever need to change anything, you go in here. So for example, you go into service control policies, and these are all the guardrails, and these are all the specific SCPs that we've enabled. So this one, for example, blocks you from creating S3 buckets in specific regions that you, if for whatever reason you want to do that, right? And so the first thing you do is there's different config files, and these are configs for configuring your accounts, your IAM configuration, your default VPC configuration, your orgs, and your security config. So let's take a look at, for example, the security config. And so in here, this is all defined. So it talks about we're going to enable Macy, we're going to enable guard duty, we're going to enable audit manager, Security Hub, and it shows you which standards we're enabling in Security Hub. So let's say I need to change something. All I do is, let's say I don't want this one anymore. I comment it out, I do the commit, and then we go into my code pipeline. And so this will then get deployed through the code pipeline, and it takes about 30 minutes to deploy if it all goes well, and then it's deployed.
Sure. So it's quite simple. All I have to do is take that config.yaml file, set, let's say, for example, I don't want Macy within certain of my accounts. I just need to set it to false, and then Macy won't be deployed.
That's correct.
That's after you commit it.
And after the pipeline finishes executing.
Sure.
And similarly, you showed the service control policies, and you showed a really good example of an S3 one not being able to create an S3 bucket in a certain environment. If you wanted to add another one, same thing. You go to that folder, add a new JSON file, put in your configurations, commit it, let the pipeline build, and that SCP is applied.
Yeah, that's correct. And you can do this, again, we've got backup policies here, config rules, and network firewall, so all kinds of stuff, and it's all just text files configuring the codes.
Sure. So just to make sure I'm aware, if I have a custom control, either a config or a SCP, I can simply check it into this folder, and LZA will deploy it.
Yeah, what I would typically do is like have a dev account where you just first configure whatever the control is, and then make sure it works. And then after that, reverse engineer it and like write the scripts to deploy it.
Excellent. And that actually follows our multi-account strategy principles. You want to test and validate your controls on an OU before.
Exactly. So ideally, I have like a dev OU, a staging OU, a prod OU, and if I'm trying a new control, I deploy it in the dev OU first, or you have a separate OU just for testing or something, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to deploy it in production first.
Yeah. And sometimes what I've seen is, I've also seen some other customers just build out a separate test environment.
You could do that as well,
they can validate all of their customizations frameworks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this, I think it really brings together, when you hear the term DevOps, this truly is bringing that together, because before, or sometimes there are people specifically that go into the AWS console, make those SCP changes and kind of build those policies, but now we're doing it as code as part of the pipeline in the DevOps environment, so it's really cool. So my question earlier was, I deployed this for a DoD customer, and is the only difference for what you're talking about today for the EDU segment just different controls, different, like a different starting baseline?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So this is actually, first of all, if you want to get started, this is the GitHub repo for Landing Zone Accelerator. And in that, there's a sample configurations folder. And then there's different sample configurations. There's like a GovCloud one, a SLG one. So this is the one for education. And the first thing that it does is, this is, to your earlier question, how it lays out the account. So there's an education OU, and it deploys some starter accounts for you in that OU. Then this is how it deploys like the actual services that it uses under the hood if you're interested. And then these are the controls that it uses. So these are the best practices, and then on top of that, we're deploying these controls. So for example, a lot of our customers, they want to, if they're a US-based higher ed institution, they don't want to put their data outside the US, right?
Right.
So they would like to block creating buckets outside the US, S3 buckets outside the US. So and that's done just through an SCP. And there's other ones, like they want to encrypt all their SSM parameters. So that one's done through a config rule. And so we tell you here, like, what's the specific file in the Git repo that addresses this, and what service does it use? And sometimes we're using like a pre-built rule, because again, we don't want to recreate the wheel. So if there's a pre-built rule, we just use that on top of it.
And that's awesome. And thanks for bringing that up. within Control Tower, we actually have a few data residency controls
Yep.
that will work very well with some of the controls that you have listed out here for LZA.
Yeah, and so out of the box, again, this is based off of our U.S. customers' controls, and on top of that, we looked at requirements in the UK. So there's like the UK Center for Cybersecurity Controls. So that's just built into the best practices config. And then there's also 2 conformance packs that fill a lot of the needs of our Australian customers, so that's included in this as well. And it's up to you. When you look at these configs, you can like uncomment or comment whatever makes sense for you, or add new things as well.
Sure. So that makes sense. So if I'm let's say I'm working in India, like for example, and there's a different kind of framework there.
Yeah.
We can simply select a few of the controls that map to the control objectives in that security framework and deploy it.
Yeah, and in fact, we love hearing from our customers. We want to keep adding to this. So if you're a customer in India and you want us to bake this in, your requirements into this config, you can just go to issues here and submit an issue for us, and we'll see that, and we'll prioritize based on how many people ask for a given issue or a given feature.
Fantastic.
Cool. Yeah. Normally we ask, well, I will ask this, how do folks get started with Landing Zone Accelerator? But you have on the screen already exactly where to go, which is the GitHub repository.
So there's 2 places to go, right? There's the GitHub repository, and then that has all the instructions you need and specific details on it. And then this is the implementation guide that's in our docs. And so this will walk you through deploying the solution. And so you can deploy Landing Zone Accelerator with Control Tower, or depending on the region, if you, for whatever reason, don't want to, you can deploy without Control Tower. But what I would recommend you do is set up Control Tower first, use that as your base, see what see if you can configure that, and then after you're done with that, go through and set this up on top of that.
Awesome. And so I can see that it's actually based off of CDK, AWS Cloud Development Kit.
So the actual, if you look at like the code pipeline and what it executes, it's deploying CDK. That's correct.
Awesome. What does the update process look like for the LZA solution?
Yeah, so the update process is we release, so if you look at the GitHub repo, if you look at like the branches, so there's different, these are all the tags for all the releases, so the latest one's like 1.41. So I think you just pull the latest code into your code commit repo and hit commit.
Works like a GitHub repository.
Yeah, and when you first set this up, there's actually a CloudFormation template that gets you started. So it does the initial deploy, sets up all the pipelines that you need and all that stuff.
Yeah, just a fair warning, it is several hours to get this set up the first time.
Yes.
But the subsequent changes are much quicker. But it's that first deployment of LZA. It takes a little bit, but it's worth it.
Sure.
Yeah, and I think that's actually probably a good thing that it takes a little bit of time, because these changes you're deploying, they could be like breaking changes, right? So you really want to test them out, and the pipeline does a lot of checking and stuff, because you want to be really deliberate. Like if you're blocking a port across every security group or doing some potentially breaking change like that, you want to test it out properly.
That's right, and that's why I would recommend that you start off with a test environment, deploy LZA and Control Tower, validate that everything is working according to your needs, and then deploy into your production environment.
Yep.
And a lot of times when we're playing with CloudFormation or infrastructure as code, we're deploying like a virtual machine, an EC2 instance, or a service, or a bucket. And here we're actually creating accounts. So it's a little bit more serious when you're creating brand new accounts that are linked already in organizations. So that helps why it takes so long to build the first time.
And a lot of our customers, when they get started, this is open source, you're free to do it yourself. But if they want some assistance, our ProServe team can help you deploy this. So we can give you very specific guidance on that as well.
Awesome. So Leo, anything else you want to share with us before we kind of call it a day?
Again, give us feedback. We want to hear what we want to evolve this. We want to hear what we need to add next. And I would say the best way to do this is just set up a new account, set up set up control tower on it, then set up Landing Zone Accelerator, and just get your hands on a keyboard, try it out in a test environment. It's the best way to get familiar with it. But I think at the end of the day, this is going to make our customers' lives easier because it's going to give them that baseline where they can control, they can have a secure by default landing zone, and then they can start deploying, whatever it is that they want to deploy, like a student information system, learning management system, anything that you put on AWS, this is a good foundation for it.
Leo, I want to ask you, who in EDU, who at the college are you guys trying to make sure knows about this? Is this the folks running the labs, or is this the IT director for the college, or is it a combination of everyone?
It's a combination. It really depends. A lot of higher institutions in the US are very decentralized, so you'll have different departments, different schools doing their own thing, but in general, a good starting point is central IT, because what we see in a lot of institutions is, like, to get your AWS account, you go talk to central IT.
Yeah.
And so if this is their method for deploying your AWS accounts, that's the ideal scenario.
Yeah, and this could make central IT's life a lot easier. So
Sure.
Exactly.
And so this would help, like, your research institutions.
Yeah.
Anytime you're deploying workspaces, RDS, anything that a university or college might need.
Yeah, so we have universities that are deploying, like, for example, like HPC clusters, or like EMR, or Redshift, or data lakes for research, or also, like, we have a solution called Service Workbench. So that solution basically lets you get researchers so they can click on a button and they can say, okay, I want, like, RStudio on an EC2 instance, and it gives them, like, a provision environment. So this is a good baseline for that. Or even, we have Lightsail for research. So there's a lot of research-specific solutions out there. But again, this is a good baseline for all of that.
yeah,
That's right.
The thing I always love to point out to build on what you just said is, what you need to build, you can run it for an evening or a weekend, or maybe like 2 weeks, and then you're done with it. You turn it off. You're done paying for it. And I think that's. I always like to add that to the end of all this, and I think LZA helps you do exactly that.
Exactly.
So everyone, thanks for tuning in. Leo, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Leo.
Nevas, it's good to meet you in person.